Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. Today we're looking at the construction sector on the continent. Now, just looking out the window from the CNBC Africa Sandton studios, there's construction going on all around us. And according to PwC reports on infrastructure, Nigeria and South Africa account for 68% of all the spending on infrastructure development in the region. With a population of over 170 million people, Nigeria and indeed Sub-Saharan Africa as a region still yearn for more infrastructure. The construction industry has a major role to play in satisfying the infrastructure needs of the people. Let's take a look at this report filed by CNBC Africa's Nkenchi Ogbonna in Lagos.
PwC Capital Projects and Infrastructure report says spending on infrastructure in Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa will reach a whopping $180 billion every year by 2025. This is up from $70 billion in 2014. As the region strides in economic development, Nigeria and South Africa are the biggest spenders, accounting for 68% of all the infrastructure spending in the region. The construction industry takes the major slice of the pie in infrastructural development in any society, as it encompasses major sectors such as mining, drilling, soil and water, and a lot more. Due to the growth in urbanization and the tremendous increase in the Nigerian population, basic infrastructural development is a necessity for Africa's largest economy.
The affordable and efficient and productive means of installing fiber optics, of installing cables, pipes, infrastructure generally, with minimal impact on the environment. Rather than open cutting with picks and shovels and breakers, we use trenching equipment which cuts very neat, compact, small trenches very quickly and fast. And where necessary, where you can't do the open cut, then we have the trenchless technologies, horizontal directional drilling for installing under roads and pavements and buildings and rivers without disrupting the surface.
And as a mega brand in Nigeria and as a part of our own strategy to contribute to the development of construction industry, we have brought a high-end heavy industry to Nigeria.
Generally, this replaces drill and blasting, and as we know, with many political factors and insurgents and things like that, the logistics of moving explosives around is becoming more and more problematic. So this really replaces the need for drill and blast, so it replaces the need for explosives.
This year, before election, we face a downtime, but we hope that after inauguration, things will pick up, because there's going to be explosive infrastructure going on across the country.
The power sector also plays a large role in infrastructure development.
But also as a part of our strategy, we always look for new ideas, for solutions, to contribute to the development in these sectors, the power, construction and engineering industry.
With the new regime, we have high hope that a lot of things is going to happen. Most of the projects, they are waiting for mobilization to move to site, and it needs money from the government. So that's why some of them are pending.
Surveys reveal low investment in the construction sector, low involvement of private sector in the provision of infrastructure facilities, policy inefficiencies in promoting indigenous contractors, and monumental corruption, among others, are some of the major hurdles hindering basic infrastructure development in Nigeria. However, opportunities abound in Nigeria for investment and infrastructural development.
And joining us now to discuss the role of the construction sector on the continent, as well as the opportunities for investment, I have with me in Johannesburg Richard Matchett. He is a Divisional Director of Development, Transportation and Infrastructure in Africa at WSP Parsons Brickenhoff Africa. Also Wessel van Zyl, he's the CEO of ESO. He's also here in Johannesburg. And from Nairobi, we're joined by Andrew Mandere. Andrew is the chairman of the Kenya Institute of Quantity Surveyors. Gentlemen, thank you for making the time to join us. Wessel, let's get a sense from you as an industry player of the lie of the land on the ground. We're seeing all of these cranes booming all over Sandton, but is this an accurate reflection to say, based on what we're seeing here, infrastructure development is booming on the continent?
Yeah, I think it's quite localized. You're quite right. When you go to Cape Town, Sandton, you'll find lots of cranes, as you say. unfortunately, the capacity that was created in construction, but maybe particularly because of the World Cup in the 2010, and international players, Europe, the construction industry quite down in Europe, everybody moving into Africa. So what you do find is there's an overcapacity. So although there is, in our view, there's quite a number of projects and viable projects, the problem is that there's also lots more competition and lots more competitors than there used to be. So, there's still an overcapacity. So we would like to see more cranes, and particularly in Durban and in Bloemfontein.
So Richard, Wessel wants to move away from the localization that we're seeing in Sandton and maybe in Cape Town in the economic hubs, and saying let's spread the opportunities a little bit. What's your view of the current landscape of the construction sector? And maybe give us a sense of the pulse of the sector and the status on the health of the sector overall.
The work is huge, the work is enormous,
Yeah.
and I think that there's enough to do. The challenge that we face continuously in the sector is a mismatch between the enabling of projects and the need for projects. I think I totally agree with Wessel, there is enough capacity to implement. In fact, I agree with you, there's an overcapacity there. We have contractors, consulting firms downscaling in some cases because there isn't enough project demand to keep everybody busy, basically. I attribute that largely to a lot of institutional challenges in overcomplicated tendering procedures, and in many cases long delays in bringing a project from a tender to groundbreaking.
So let's take the South African view and let's juxtaposition it against what we might be seeing in Kenya. And Andrew, let's bring you into the conversation and get your perception at this moment of the construction sector in Kenya. We've heard in South Africa that we're potentially looking at an overcapacity issue, and we're potentially looking at a gap between the available projects and actually bringing them to bankability. Tell us what's happening in Kenya from your point of view.
It's actually very, very, very active. There's a lot of construction going on in almost every sector, most importantly in infrastructural development, in the roads, in the ICT, telecommunication connections, dams, and even in shopping malls. There's plenty of activity going on at the moment.
And Andrew, the drivers of that positive growth that we're seeing in that particular sector, are those drivers specific to the Kenyan economy?
No, I don't think so, because I think most of the government is the main driver in the construction of infrastructure, but there's a lot of direct foreign investment coming in from international community and also from even African community. So you may not say that it's unique to Kenya, because most of the investors even are coming from the Far East, like in China. They are bringing in a lot of resources that are actually driving the construction industry at the moment. And I think they are doing the same thing all over Africa. So I don't think it's unique to Kenya.
So let's take that point, Andrew, and let's throw it back, and I want to bring it back to you, Wessel, and let's talk about where the money is coming from. We're hearing from Andrew that there might be a number of players that have interest in the sector. Where's the biggest fund and the biggest financial muscle coming from pumping into the South African construction sector?
Yeah, we find, call it still from the American side of it, Millennium Funding, USAID. There's still quite a number of aid projects happening in Africa. And I think, as Richard has said, those take long before they come to the market. So you have to have a good 3 to 4 year lead time before those projects come to the market. There's also a number of projects, particularly Zimbabwe and Zambia, that we're looking at. We're quite keen on closer to South Africa to keep our base close. And there we also find that the Chinese and Indians are bringing money to the market. But when an investor brings money to the market, he also brings a contractor to the market. So that does put us on the back foot. From the South African side, we are talking to DBSAs, we are talking to some sponsors, investment funds, and we're trying to put together, not particularly PPPs, but we're trying to put a turnkey project together for design and construct. But yes, you have to take money into Africa, and I think Andrew is quite right.
Right.
You know, the investors comes from maybe the Middle East as well, but they bring money and normally a contractor.
You raised a couple of very important points, and I think we'll take them piece by piece. And Richard, I want to bring maybe the first one, and let's just talk a little bit about about development finance institutions coming to the party and funding infrastructure on the continent. Are we finding that they are effective in bridging that funding gap that might exist in terms of getting the continental ambitions for infrastructure off the ground?
I think certainly, I mean, all the sources of funding contribute towards getting the job done. The biggest challenges that they face is security of their investments. It's one thing to pour a lot of money into the continent expecting a return. The other one is having the certainty that that return will be realized as well. I think that at the moment we're in this chicken and an egg phase where Africa desperately needs infrastructure to enable its economy to grow, and this is a recurring theme. One of the places that the money is going to come from is with the sovereign wealth that comes from natural resources. So as the gas and the oil fields start getting unlocked, a lot of that cash starts coming to the market to enable the development of infrastructure, etc. But we know which comes first. So the gap that you're talking about, where we don't yet have a comprehensive road network, we don't yet have the rail systems to be able to move things around. That aid is vital for that purpose, and then with a long-term view to paying it back once the industry, the industrialization and the natural resources start yielding the returns that they're supposed to.
So on that note, let's take a short break. When we come back, let's pick up on a point that Vessel made, and this is of course with foreign investors coming in with their own contractors, and whether this is muscling out some of the local players that we see in the construction sector across the continent. Let's see you in 2 minutes. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on Invest Africa. And still with me here in Johannesburg is Richard Matchett, the Divisional Director of Development, Transportation and Infrastructure in Africa at WSP Parsons Brickenhoff Africa. Vessel van Zyl, the CEO of ESOL, also here in Johannesburg. And from Nairobi, we're still joined by Andrew Mandera. He is the Chairman of the Kenya Institute of Quantity Surveyors. Let's kick off this second half of the show by starting off in Nairobi. And Andrew, I'd like you to pick up on a point that Vessel had made before we went to break, and this is with international investment or foreign investment into the sector often comes contractors aligned with that investment. Is this muscling out the local players on the ground, or are we finding that Kenyan companies or broadly African companies are also participants in the sector?
They are active, but the local African contractors, I think they are almost being sidelined on big projects. So it's like they are taking the remnants. The big multinationals, especially now from China, they are taking the bigger infrastructural projects, especially on roads and dams and bridges and so on. And even the European companies which used to do major works in Kenya and East Africa generally.
Appropriate experiences. And so I think all over Africa we're finding that Africa is catching up fast in terms of the qualifications, and the universities are starting to push out more and more graduates. But when it comes to the accreditation of those institutions, when it comes to the recognition of the qualifications, there's a challenge, and there's a gap that I believe is starting to close. But until it's properly closed, there's always going to be a struggle for the African participants to match up to, call it the grade,
right.
In terms of what the clients want.
What would your reaction be to that, Vessel? Is it a skills shortage problem that is sidelining the local players, or is there a plethora of reasons that we should be looking at?
Yeah, and Richard is quite correct. You know, we find as well that the tendering conditions to pre-qualify for a project, which traditionally, let's call it in South Africa or Botswana, the South African contractors would traditionally qualify for a similar project somewhere else in Africa. The the entry point, or just the, you have to have 5 of these at a certain level, where the South African contractors might have 2 of those at a certain level. So those are the skills. I think South African contractors are very competent. Compared to the industry and the rest of the world, we are right up there. We don't need to stand back for everybody else. Yes, major projects, when we're talking multi-billion dollars, then unfortunately the South African industry is small and there's a number of big players, but you then have to work together.
What about partnering? Is there scope for real partnerships between the handful of the big giants that we find in the sector and the local players who might not be able to stand on their own for a multi-billion-dollar deal, but can certainly contribute at a subcontracting level?
Yeah, I think the Lesotho projects, most of the dam projects, we have no choice in South Africa but to partner. So you'll find in many of the bigger projects, 3 of the big companies, 3 of the big 5 that will have to partner. And when there's a water scheme and a dam project, you will find that, so it's a general, it's common to JV.